Good afternoon, dear readers of Global Research. My name is Michel Chossudovsky from the Center for Research on Globalization based in Montreal. We have the privilege today to an interview with Professor Rodrigue Tremblay, who in Canada is a legend, specialist in free trade zones, balance of payments, but also geopolitics, former Minister of Commerce and Industry in the Quebec government, and author of numerous books. His latest book is called The Code for Global Ethics, 10 Humanist Principles. And he's also a graduate of Stanford University and professor at the University of Montreal. I welcome Rodrigue. Our program today focuses on the illustrious new president of the United States, Donald Trump, an examination of his mandate, his interests, and, well, I let Rodrigue use the bad words against him. So, well, welcome. No, it's serious, not bad words, but some innuendos of incompetence. Rodrigue, you have written two very important articles recently, in the last, in fact, coinciding 1 week after the instatement of the new president of the United States on the 20th of January, and then your articles, they came out in early February, and one focuses on the whole economic dimension, which is absolutely fundamental in terms of how they're managing both their domestic economy as well as the global economy. And the dangers underlying that, and the levels of competence or incompetence of the team of Donald Trump, and then you also in your latest article, I'll read the title so that people will get an understanding of what the focus is. The U.S. government of Donald Trump is oligarchic, dysfunctional, and disruptive to the global economy. And I like this section here. It says an unhinged president like a door or whatever. And let me just start, and that's my question to Rodrigue this afternoon. I'll just make two statements quoting Donald Trump, which date to February 5th. So that's 2 days ago before the recording of this program. And this is what he says. I can't imitate his accent, obviously, but let me be very clear. Any nation that tries to take advantage of the United States will face maximum pressure like ever before. Now, I'm not sure who is the victim behind that, whether it's the United States or these countries that pressure Donald Trump. And then he says, under my leadership, we don't let foreign governments rip us off. We fight back and we win. Okay? My question to Rodrigue, how do you view these citations, and could you elaborate on the nature of this presidency, both from a geopolitical standpoint as well from an economic standpoint?
Well, these two quotations, um, shows a bit of paranoia on the part of President Trump. It's always us against them. It's always we're losing and they are winning, and so on. My analysis makes me to believe that we are entering into interesting times, as the Chinese say, uh, because this is, from my point of view, the end of the post-World War II period, a period of great prosperity for most countries in the world, where the standard of living more than doubled in many places. But that period seems to coming to an end. International law is pushed aside. International institution like the United Nations, other organizations, the Organization for International Trade, uh, and so on, are pushed aside. Um, treaties are not followed and respected. Therefore, we are entering a world of arbitrariness, where the U.S. government behaves only for its own good. It doesn't accept any responsibility to stabilize the world economy, even though the U.S. dollar is the main currency being used by central banks all around the world. Therefore, that period, if it is going to proceed, is going to create a lot of chaos in the world, a lot of disorder, and everybody will lose. Everybody will see, every country will suffer. There are about $3 trillion of international trade each year between countries. Uh, that means that the most economies are integrated to the world economy, and they export the most productive production of their own. They import what they cannot produce. For example, in Canada, we import a lot of fruits from South America, from other countries, and the reverse, because we have resources in oil and gas and electricity. We export a lot of aluminum and steel. So everybody wins in that kind of trade. Mr. Trump, though, consider the U.S. government now presently as its own government. It has become a private government, and he behaves as if it is his own corporation, his own business. And when he was in business, he had a reputation of uh, negotiating uh, in order to win and make the other party to lose. When he was building buildings, he had a reputation of not paying the contractors. And when they insist of being paid, he just threatened them with lawsuits in order to weaken them. And Mr. Trump also had six failures, bankruptcies. Even his casino in Atlantic City went into bankruptcy. It's very hard for a casino to go bankrupt because the rules are usually pro owners of casinos. Now he wants to start a series of tariff wars against other countries. And he began starting with the two countries, Canada and Mexico, with whom he signed a revised agreement a few years ago in 2020, and he signed that agreement. But obviously, he didn't intend to respect it, since he wanted to raise tariffs by 25% on any imports from Canada and any imports from Mexico, and he put a 10% tariff on all imports from China. And next week, uh, he has announced that he will raise tariffs against European countries. So this means an international trade wars. Mind you, this has been done before. In 1930s, a few months after the crash of 1929, the Herbert Hoover Republican administration raised their tariffs, the American tariffs, 20% all over the world. Other countries reacted to these tariffs, and the international trade collapsed. And that turned a recession, economic recession, into an economic depression that lasted until 1939 and even longer during the war, the Second World War. So this is no joke. It's not. It's a very serious attack on prosperity, economic prosperity around the world, and everybody concerned, institution, individuals, corporations, banks, universities, should react to that and try to stop before the damage is done.
I noticed that in your article you state that he actually you say from the Oval Office. Okay, well, the Oval Office is of course a very important place, but he doesn't really have anybody talking to him in the Oval Office. He sends his presidential decrees from the Oval Office, empty, yes, and then some in violation. I'm quoting you. Some in violation of existing laws adopted by the U.S. Congress, and then he sends them off to be adopted. Some of them are maybe legal, and others have maybe in violation of the Constitution, and that of course is what we might call dictatorial, because it violates the Constitution and legality. But then there's another element which I've noticed, and I think we've discussed that, is that he looks at his statements as being those of a real estate mogul, as you say, where you invest and so on, and then it really is for his personal enrichment, which he's acting. He's not acting. He says he's not making America greater again. It's not a MAGA. Well, make America worse again. A MAWA.
Well, you're right. And for the last 2 weeks, since January 20th, President Trump has been a one-man government. I've been in a government myself. I was Minister of Industry and Commerce in the Quebec government. And the first thing that the Prime Minister does after an election is to have a reunion of his cabinet. I'm pretty sure that Mr. Trump has not conveyed his cabinet so far, because he doesn't need them. He issue orders. They are executants of his orders. He chose yes men and yes women, and he chose one billionaire, Elon Musk, to do the job, who has never been elected to any function, to cut down employment in many departments, especially the main departments, justice, the Pentagon, and State Department, and other departments, of course, uh, uh, from his own decision, with no consultation with the Congress, with senators, electors, House of Representatives, only by his own, using decrees. When a politicians, a head of government, governed by decrees, he is a dictator. He is a dictator. But the U.S. Constitution is a constitution of checks and balances. The father of that constitution tried to have a, a constitution that prevent a king to or an emperor to impose himself on the people. But now, 100 years or 200 years after the beginning of the Constitution, the signing of the Constitution, the United States is threatened by pushing aside the Constitution. Mind you, if you have witnessed the ceremony when Mr. Trump uh, took an oath of respecting the Constitution, he didn't put his hand on the Bible. He kept it alongside himself. He only repeated the words that somebody else told him to repeat. I think in his own mind, he probably saying to himself, "I never sworn oath to the Constitution. Therefore, I want to govern by one man." And historically, this has happened in other countries. Each 100 years, it seems, there's a wind uh, of collective craziness that goes in important countries. Uh, the British historian Arnold Toynbee has observed that over the last centuries, the beginning of each century uh, witnessed the arrival into power of people who are dictator-like, and they create hegemonic wars. This happened, of course, with Napoleon Bonaparte in France. This happened in the 20th century in Italy with Benito Mussolini. It happened to Nazi Germany with Adolf Hitler. And now in the 21st century, there's a politician who is from a German ancestry. The family of Donald Trump come originally from Germany, who wants to do the same thing. If you remember the picture of David of Napoleon being crowned by the Pope, and Napoleon Bonaparte took the crown from the Pope's hands and put it on of his own head, showing that I'm an absolute dictator. And Mr. Trump is not very far away from that position of declaring himself a dictator. Maybe he has used the pretext of an emergency to raise tariffs against countries with whom the United States has trade agreements, which was a pure pretext. He can use another pretext, pretext of security emergency in order to declare himself dictator, or even declare a war and say that now there's a war, then there's an emergency. Therefore, the Congress is suspended. And that's a real danger. It's not hypothetical. It can go on if people don't react strong enough, especially the members of Congress, the senators and the congressmen, whichever their parties. they should defend the Constitution, and they should tell they should not let the courts being the only obstacle to Mr. Trump's aims of concentrating power into his own hands.
But I think there's a nuance between the history of let's say, of dictators and Donald Trump, because these dictators, in fact, they still had a political project. Now he doesn't have a political project.
Well, he has a project. He has a project of his own political interest.
But that's what I mean.
He gave a show, a daily show, TV show, where he shows his power to the world. That's a project in itself, you know.
But there's also an element of there's complete. How would one describe it? It's you're a professor of economics. What grade would you give him as far as economics is concerned? Okay, it's incompetence.
It would be an F.
Well, no, I would go for
F plus maybe.
F plus, yeah. Let's F plus. Now, maybe
you have to remember that in other countries, politicians were elected before they declared themselves dictators. In the case of Adolf Hitler, he was elected in 1933. Then his supporters burned the parliament. Then he said, "This is a crisis, therefore I'm a dictator." In the case of Benito Mussolini, with his so-called black shirts, had a march to Rome, and the head of state at that time was somebody who was very weak, and named him president of the country. So there are precedent. And Arnold Toynbee said that this happened in many times in the past, at the beginning of a century, and most of us were not alive in 1920s, 1930s. Nobody has lived into a depression, economic depression. Nobody has lived really during a world war. There are still some people who have lived into Second World War. But some people now, the young generation, consider wars as romantic, even if we have nuclear weapons that can destroy the planet. And the Society of Atomic Specialists say we are in something 89 seconds from disaster now. And these are atomic scientists. So it's no joke of having somebody who has a mental state which is unstable, autocratic, demagogic, have his finger on the nuclear weapon. This is very dangerous, especially in the case of Mr. Trump, who has said a few years ago, a few days ago, that if somebody assassinated him, he will blame Iran, and he has given instruction to his aide to destroy Iran, a country of 80 million people. He had said the same thing against North Korea 4 years ago. So if you have somebody who has such incendiary comments, that means his mind is not normal.
Well, that's precisely where we have to mobilize people around the world, because his actions with regard to tariffs are deadly, both the United States as well as to the countries which are being targeted, and of course we're based in Montreal, and we must also address the impacts on the Canadian economy. and this is the object of media coverage and so on. How do you view the issue? Well, he said we have to address the northern border, although he did in his speech he didn't mention the northern border. He mentioned the southern border, but it was understood that the northern border had to comply, and the impacts are devastating at the levels, and people understand it. Companies understand it. Small and medium-sized enterprises understand it. But our governments seem to be sort of pro-Trump because they have to be pro-American and give in to this F plus student of Rodrigue Tremblay.
Well,
sorry about that.
This is all well known for a long time. Mr. Trump had a book written. He had the ghostwriter, Mr. Watch, who wrote his book called "The Art of the Deal," that somebody calls "The Art of a Steal," because in Mr. Trump's mind, any transaction, economic transaction, but human transaction, has always a winner and a loser. It's called the predatory dealing. Compare in real life, cooperation dealing means there is winning on both sides to have a transaction. If somebody buys your product, we buy their products, and we are happy because we specialize in what we manufacture the best at the lower cost. But for Mr. Trump, there's always a loser and always a winner, and he always wants to be the winner. So he wouldn't mind dismantling 3/4 of a century of a world economy, which is very integrated now, trade-wise, but technology-wise and capital-wise. And it took 3/4 of a century to build that prosperity in most countries, including the underdeveloped countries, the developing countries, but in Europe, Asia, North America, South America, Australia, every country is participating. But now the United States would like to shut its border, bring all American companies back to the United States, and forcing other countries' companies to come to the United States as if it were a world into itself. No country is an island into itself. It will be a fallacy to believe such an error, and it will be a disaster for the world economy if we were to repeat the same mistakes which were made in 1930s, which turned into the financial crash and the recession into an economic depression and led into a world war. We don't want to repeat history, but if we don't know history, we are condemned to repeat it.
I recall that was a recent statement of Donald Trump regarding Gaza. It reflects a bit his perception of economic, social, and broader issues when he said, "Well, we're going to the Gaza Strip is going to belong to the United States." Well, that first of all, that is an endorsement essentially of a genocide, because it means the expulsion of Palestinians from their homeland. But the fact is that he he has sent one of his friends who is a real estate multi-billionaire, and then he has his brother. I'm sorry, no, it's his son-in-law, who is
Jared
also,
Kushner.
yeah, Kushner. He's also involved, and what they want to do is to transform that Gaza now, which is totally destroyed, into a sort of a project of urbanization for rich people, and with a few hotels and so on. Now it boggles the mind that this statement should be in fact accepted, and accepted by European countries. Nobody is really confronting his statements in any meaningful way. He's complicit in genocide because he's excluding Palestinians from their homeland.
And this come back to what a lot of many psychiatrists and psychologists have seen in Mr. Trump's mental state, which is a will to dominate and a lack of empathy. And he doesn't, people with that trait of character don't mind hurting other people, provided they take pleasure or benefit from these deserting of the people. In the case of the Gaza, one would have thought that the Biden administration, with Mr. Blinken, was very bad and complicit to what the Netanyahu government has been doing, um, bombing civilians. It seems somebody has made the remark that no wars are not between soldiers, not wars are against civilian populations. And there is a 1949 Geneva Convention that says that no country should do that, that Absolutely. You should not bomb civilian populations. Mind you, the United States bombed Hiroshima, the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, killing 200 million people, 200,000 people or more. Yeah, 200,000. But this, without, will be inhuman to bomb civilian populations. But this is being done, turned into a genocide, the first genocide of the 21st century happening in Palestine today. And Mr. Trump is worse than Mr. Biden in the sense that he wants to clean. He had mentioned that, kill everybody, destroy everybody, and then that will solve the problem. I suppose he received many $1 million, a lot of contribution from people who think that way, but this is inhuman. I wrote a book about morality, which has been published by Prometheus books in the United States, and it has been published in French in Canada. I wrote also a book about the New American Empire in 2003. It was published in the United States in English, was published in French in France, was published in Turkey in Turkish language. And I've been following the politics of the United States for a long time. And I will say that the President George W. Bush, who I quote in one of my articles, saying that God was telling him to go to start wars there and there. And Mr. Trump says that God is on our side. He just made that statement many times. This is very, very worrying to have one of the most, at least as far as armaments are concerned, arm in the country, to have somebody who is so irrespectful of the other rights of other people. And this cannot go on, and it should be condemned, especially by elected members of Congress in the United States, but by other countries, especially the Western countries, and condemned by any thinking person, any intellectual, and any other newspapers, editorials, in order to prevent a disaster and chaos.
I think I fully concur with your statements, and you bring forth what was called the laws of armed conflict. That's the laws of armed conflict say very clearly, killing civilians is a crime against humanity under international law. There can be so-called collateral damage when it's not intended, but here it is intended. It is intended to kill. Up to now, we're talking about the figures are maybe misleading as to how many people have been killed, and a majority of children and women and children in the Israeli war theater. Now, you mentioned Hiroshima, Nagasaki. Now, I recall President Trump. I'm sorry, not President. Harry Truman. Yeah. Well, they may have some relationship, but Harry Truman. He made a very important statement because he knew about the concept of law of armed conflict. He said, and I quote and paraphrase, the world will note that the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, a military base. And that was because we wanted to save the lives of innocent civilians. Many
wars are started with lies. You know,
I think most of them start with lies.
Or false flags. In the case of the invasion of Iraq in 2003, in March 2003, it was for weapons of mass destruction. Everybody knew it was false, but that was a pretext. The pretext was to get control the oil of Iraq, and even today, 20 years after, the United States is controlling the sale of oils from Iraqi oil being sold in international economy, and now they are taking over the oil of Syria. The same, I think, under pretext is surely not to impose democracy, because the new government of Syria, for example, is a foothold of Al-Qaeda, nothing close to democracy. Democracy
Well, it's Al-Qaeda, which was really refers to the so-called freedom fighters, which were first recruited enough to wage the war, so-called against the Soviet Union, but it was in Afghanistan. But that was the first stage. But I think we have to send a message to the anti-war movement, and also to the issue, the economic issue. And I think they're intertwined. They're not separate. They're not separate issues. because economic warfare is always contingent upon, well, if you have a military operation, you're going in to acquire all the resources and the wealth of a country, and so there's always an economic objective behind all wars, and I think that's something that Trump understands, mind you.
Where he has made insult, threats, and attacks against 12 countries so far in 2 weeks. Obviously, Panama, Denmark, Groenland, Canada, and so on. Now Gaza, and there's a play called Risk. I think he has a copy of that play where the world is divided in 4 regions, and they fight each other. So that's why Groenland, Canada, the US, Mexico, even Cuba, I think, is included in that, will be one block, trying to create a block in Asia, a block in Africa, and a block in South America. And these blocks, so there won't be any independent countries. There will be empires. Somebody wrote an article recently saying that the world of empires, the 19th century is back, with politicians would think about not democracy, not the rights of people, the power of people, but the power of emperors, the powers of empire. If we are entering such a world, that would be a huge step backward for humanity, for freedom, for prosperity, for the right of individuals, for free enterprise. It would be centralized. Everything would be centralized, and the military would be the greatest industry in most countries, which is a waste. It's not consumed. Every country needs a military, a minimum of military to keep orders. But besides that, if it is for invasion of other countries, it's predatory. And this is a backward. And the United Nations, which was founded in 1945 in San Francisco by 46 countries, was supposed to outlaw all aggressive wars of aggression. Now we are coming back to that world. It's a movement backward, and it should be condemned, and it should be told to his face, the face of President Trump, that he cannot go on in that direction.
Well, I think that's a very good conclusion, which we should spread across the land, and say, you can't go in that direction, Donald. Donald the dictator. I call him DD. That's a polite, we're in the world of acronyms, so DD.
C'est ça.
Donald the dictator. Actually, that's that concept was presented by Ralph Nader. Donald the dictator.
We should call a duck. If somebody walks like a duck and does quack quack like a duck, it's a duck. And sometimes people are afraid to face reality, but we must face reality for what it is. And unfortunately, Mr. Trump, President Trump, is not in the real world. He is in a fantasy world of his own making.
Well, that's something also very important to underscore. And being in a fantasy world of his own making is not consistent, or doesn't correlate with the functions of a president of the United States, which operates in terms of a constitution and rules of law and so on. But the whole judicial system is criminalized as well, and the the International Court of Justice is criminalized, because they control the appointments and so on. Thank you very much, Rodrigue, and we will continue. We will continue at Global Research to inform the worldwide. It's not an easy task, given the fact that we are the object of censorship for saying the truth. And I call upon our readers also to support Lux Media, which is producing this program, and of course also to support Global Research, and important, forward this video worldwide. Thank you very much, Rodrigue, and we'll see you next time.
Most welcome. Most welcome.